Thank you, Milan, and thank you all for having me today. Um, it's a pleasure to provide the keynote address. Uh, as was already stated, my name is Derek Cabrera. I'm a complexity scientist specializing in cognitive complexity, and I'm faculty at Cornell University and Cabrera Research Lab, where we run Cornell's annual conference on thinking, which is last year we got about 7,000 people. And I'm co-host of the Cabrera Lab podcast. So it seems like people are increasingly interested in thinking, which was, you'll hear, not necessarily the case some 30 years ago when I started on this journey. So how many of you have ever stopped to ask yourself what is thinking? It's something we all do every moment. Yet I would say we rarely pause to explore what it is. So over the next 40 or so minutes, I hope to share some surprising insights that could fundamentally change how you approach not just thinking, but maybe even life itself and the way you approach kind of work. And we sometimes say it's professional. It's both personal and professional. These insights we've discovered in our last the 30 years of research that we've done, including 12 books and hundreds of research papers, and in our teaching of our many students at Cornell University, as well as working with nearly every sector and all kinds of folks. One of my favorite things is that I get to teach the same ideas to kindergartners and sixth graders and high schoolers. The same very ideas that I teach them, I teach to leading CEOs out of the Silicon Valley, operators in the special forces, professional athletes, and top scientists. And I really don't change it up too much. I teach the same thing to all of those different groups. My partner in crime, both scientifically and in life, is my wife, Laura Cabrera, and she's also faculty at Cornell. And together we arrived at some remarkable findings, some of which I'll share with you today. Our research started by asking a very simple question: what is thinking? But I initially thought I'd ask the question and move on to more important things. See, I assumed that people in the know would know the answer to this question, and much to my surprise, they did not. I was not impressed with the answers that I got. And so I've been asking the same question ever since, and the answers have spawned the field of cognitive complexity. Today, I'd like to share with you a little bit of what we've learned and why it's important to you. But I'll give you the punchline right up front, which is that as agile folks, here's the basic idea that thinking literally, quite literally, puts the agility in agile. Thinking, like I said, quite literally is the tool that we humans use for everything. But most importantly, thinking is the number one tool that evolution gave us to be phenotypically adaptive, or the evolutionary term for agile, essentially. It's the single most important tool that we use to understand complexity so that we can be successful leaders within it. 30 years ago, when I said these things, it landed kind of like a lead balloon. But today, I'm happy to say that today, people are starting to see the importance of thinking. And maybe it's the times. As one example, we have a podcast on thinking, the Cabrera Lab podcast, which is in its infancy of 30 episodes, and it's already shot up to the top 3% of podcasts worldwide, and continues to kind of grow weekly. So we're seeing what we haven't seen, for 20 or 25 years. We have not seen the interest that we're seeing today. So people, I think, are running up against a wall where they can't solve a lot of the problems that they're trying to solve, and they're realizing that the answer is in thinking.
Derek, just to make sure, I'm not sure if you're intending to share anything, but you're not sharing, so.
No, I don't have any slides today. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our research and just kind of talk to you just from the off the cuff kind of stuff.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure this is sometimes.
Yeah. Yep. So Not long ago, I was speaking with a pretty swank team of engineers at a very technical, very well-known company. They build big, very complex stuff. And I asked them, imagine you have a problem that you need to solve. And this particular problem is a doozy, right? This problem challenges not only all of your tools, and they have some of the most advanced tools, labs full of tools, software, machines, machinery, all kinds of stuff. So this problem not only can't be solved with any of your tools, but it also seems to be pushing your methods to the test. None of the methods, processes, and frameworks that you've used in the past successfully seem to make any dent in this particular problem. Not only that, but the particular wicked and dastardly problem that you're facing tests the very core of you, your training, all the years you toiled and studied, and all the untold, unmeasurable benefits of studying, in this case, engineering, where you train to do engineering. This particular problem tested even that. So what do? I asked them. What will you use to solve this problem? And they were a little bit stumped, and they brainstormed lots of guesses, but all of them seemed to circle around tools, technologies, methods, frameworks, or first principles, or even going back to their training. And then one of them, after a little, this took a little while, but one of them yelled out, we'd have to think differently. And he was right. But it makes an important point. Thinking is so basal, so basic, so operating in the background that it gets short shrift. It's not our go-to tool or technology. It's not our go-to framework. In school, we're taught mostly what to think and spend precious little time learning how to think. Thinking is somewhat akin to breathing. We do it all the time, so it doesn't seem central as the most consequential thing we do when we're doing anything. Unless it's somehow tested in the high performance situation or even hindered, and then all of a sudden you realize just how important it is. Thinking is a tool we use all the time, and it's a tool we always rely on when all else fails. But when was the last time you asked? We say agility, but what are we thinking in an agile way? And what does that even mean? Does thinking in an agile way mean following what is currently thought of as agile? And what if it doesn't work? Now, I want you to imagine trying to improve something now. So say you're trying to lose 20 pounds or something like that. It doesn't matter what the improvement is. We'll say it's that you have a goal of losing 20 pounds. And imagine a situation where you couldn't define or measure or even know how to improve it. There's no scales, there's no macros, there's no calorie counting, and there's no idea of how weight loss works. You even go to a coach or a trainer and you say, can you help me lose 20 pounds? And they say, not really, just try something. That seems absurd, right? But this is the challenge of thinking. And this is exactly where we are today with thinking. Thinking, like movement, is pervasive. It's the one thing humans do more than anything else. It drives every behavior. It drives every decision, every action, and every prediction that we make. But wrong thinking also underlies nearly all the problems and undesired outcomes. Yet, until recently, we didn't fully understand thinking. We couldn't measure it. There were no feedback loops to tell us what worked and what didn't work. Our attitude was sort of, you're either good at it or not. You're either born good at thinking or you're not. Rather than the truth of the matter, which is you're expressly bad at it until you practice, just like a lot of things in life. And a little bit of practice can make vast improvements. That's what we've shown in our research. So to put this in context, I want you to think about something that always kind of blows my mind. If you and I were to go out into my backyard one day and practice for a single hour how to throw the javelin, right? This little spear thing in the Olympics. After that 1 hour, we will be better at throwing the javelin than 80% of the world's population. That's kind of mind-blowing if you think about it. If we had the opportunity to be coached in that 1 hour by the foremost expert in javelin throwing, or somebody that was just really good at javelin throwing, we'd likely be better than 90% of the world's population at javelin throwing after 1 hour. With just a little bit of effort, we can see remarkable gains. Now, if you Google types of thinking, you'll find something like 38 different categories of thinking, different types of thinking. Critical thinking, creative thinking, strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and so on, right? Lots of them. We've counted 38 in total. And it sounds pretty overwhelming, but there's really good news, which is you don't need to learn 38 different types of thinking. The brain doesn't work that way. The brain doesn't work in those silos, and it doesn't really recognize those types of thinking. It uses the same patterns for all of them. And those patterns we call, by an acronym, DSRP, distinctions, systems, relationships, and perspectives. And when you master these, you master thinking itself. I've had many people tell me, but we all think differently. And no, that's not really true. We all think the same way. We all think wildly different things, but we think those wildly different things in the same way. After all, we all have different hearts, but we go to the same heart doctor. There is fundamentally order in the universe. And this is good news, by the way, because it means you don't have to learn 38 types of thinking. The other misconception we have with thinking, which I heard again and again, I heard it just the other day, I heard this, is that thinking is only the conscious or aware part. And that's not true. Thinking, which scientists call cognition, by the way, is conscious, and a fair amount of it is subconscious. It's both. Being aware of our thinking and our thinking about thinking, which is what scientists call metacognition, is very important. The research on the effects of metacognition are very clear and quite profound. Metacognition, which again means becoming aware of your thinking processes, as well as some of what you're doing subconsciously, this research found is key to high achievement in all domains. In fact, this meta-analytic study, which means simply that it's an important study that took many other studies into account, found that if you wanted to improve, for example, emotional intelligence, which is very important, social and emotional skills of all kinds, you'd actually be better off taking a training in metacognition than taking a training in emotional intelligence. That's kind of a little surprising. On the surface, that sounds like a very surprising finding, but it isn't so different than what we find all the time in terms of lots of different forms of training. If you want to be a faster sprinter, for example, not all of it comes from merely sprinting more. A lot might be improved by isolating the underlying explosivity of the muscles and working structurally and dynamically on isolated movements like plyometrics. That's somewhat counterintuitive to a lot of us. Our assumption usually goes something like this. If you want to get better at X, just do more of X. And while that's true, it's not true when it comes to certain foundational skills like thinking, metacognition, and mental fitness. Now, I should say, I didn't start off as a cognitive system scientist or a complexity scientist. I was a high school dropout. I didn't know why at the time I didn't do so well and had so many difficulties in high school and school. But I would later learn that I was ADHD and autistic, and what some today call autism, which is the combination of the two, which those weren't even things when I was a kid. So we didn't know about these things. So I started doing what I loved, and the only real skill that I had at the time was mountain climbing. I started out as a mountain guide and spending over 200 days a year in a tent guiding clients up the mountains of the world. And it was in the mountains that I came to understand systemic forms of thinking. To a climber, the summit of a mountain is just an interdisciplinary problem that needs to be solved. But to solve it, you have to understand the mountain and the expedition as a complex system of systems, a balance of physics, biology, psychology, and sociology. There are the systems of physics like technical gear, the rope rescue systems, and the external forces like weather and snowpack, biology, physiology like hydration, energy, metabolism, managing heat and moisture. And of course, there are the psychological and sociological systems. Climbing is as much a mental game as it is a physical game. And most expeditions fail, and a lot of people don't know this, but most expeditions fail not because of some technical difficulty, but because of conflict between people on the expedition. So interpersonal dynamics. This system of systems is not unlike the challenges that we all face every day, managing technical systems, external forces, organizational dynamics, and social relationships. Your job, like mine, is to make them all work together or better. But if I were to boil down everything I learned from, and I still guide today, so I don't know how many years that is, some large amount of decades in the mountains, it would be this single idea that we have to learn to love reality. That means that we have to seek the truth even when it's uncomfortable, pay attention to the signs around you, and perhaps most importantly, pay attention to the biases that are inside of you, the ones that make you desperately want something to be true even when it's not. Mountaineers actually have a saying, which is the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. And when what you think aligns with the ways things actually are, your decisions will work the way you think they should. That's a really important idea. When what you think, I'm going to say it again, when what you think aligns with the way things actually are, your decisions will work the way you think they should. And then what that also means is that when things don't work the way you think they should, that's reality giving you feedback that your mental model was wrong. So the hardest part of systems thinking isn't learning how to analyze systems. It's wanting to get it right so much that you're willing to confront the truth no matter how difficult that truth is. And that's where we are today. For decades, thinking was like movement before exercise, critical to survival, but poorly understood and rarely measured. But now we can measure thinking. We know what it is, we know how to improve it, and we know what to practice to get better. And I get it. I really do. No one wants to think. I'm in a field of, I study something that no one really wants to do. Most of our most popular entertainment, games, and social media and software is popular precisely because it doesn't ask us to think. It's often said, everyone wants the view, but no one wants the climb. And thinking is no different. It takes effort, it takes practice. But let me tell you about the view. Better thinking unlocks problem solving, emotional intelligence, better decisions, richer relationships, happiness, and even success. This is the research speaking on this. But above all, it gives us kind of what I like to think of as whole human adaptivity. It really actually is the thing that drives our ability to be adaptive or agile. The ability to adapt to anything across every dimension of what it means to be human, physically, emotionally, motivationally, and mentally. Taking in this view means taking in that it increases social and emotional skills like communication and interpersonal skills, higher order thinking skills like problem solving, critical, and systems thinking, self-awareness, intrapersonal skills, and metacognition, and makes you fundamentally adaptive. But those are all technical terms. Being aware of your thinking is being aware of yourself, knowing yourself. It is, in a word, an awesome view. It's awesome to be in alignment with oneself. Mental fitness drives everything else. And this is really important in the agile process. Like a Navy SEAL team, where the fitness of the individual determines the strength of the whole, thinking fitness drives the strength of teams, organizations, and even societies. But here's where we often misunderstand fitness. Fitness isn't just getting in shape. It's getting in shape for something. Fit for what? To lift 500 pounds or to run 500 miles? To live long or to live vitally? Fitness should be really thought about as fittedness, because it's not just about capability. It's about being fitted to the challenges we face. The same goes for thinking. Agile frameworks or any other tools are only as good as the adaptivity of the people using them. So it's always a little cringy when I hear on like big pharma commercials on TV and it tells you about a pill and all of its benefits, like Xylestra or some weird sounding pill. But then they tell you about the possible side effects, which usually involve some kind of leakage, headaches, strokes, and even death. I'm always surprised people still want the pill after that. But I want to tell you the tale of two pills. First, imagine I told you about a pill that could extend your life, boost your energy, help you lose weight, improve your mood and sleep, enhance your physical vitality, even your sex drive, and its side effects are virtually none. How fast would you rush to get a prescription? How much would you pay for that pill? People would pay a lot for that one. And that pill exists. It's called movement and whole nutrition. Now let me tell you about another pill. This one can make you future ready, increase your emotional intelligence and resilience, improve communication, teamwork, and decision making, strengthen your ability to solve problems, handle complexity, and adapt to change, reduce overwhelm, anxiety, and burnout, enhance self-awareness and the ability to help others. It also tackles some of the most persistent challenges we face, like overthinking, conflict, miscommunication, and cognitive biases. And it has zero nasty side effects. And how much would you pay for that? This pill also exists. It's called thinking or metacognition, the ability to think about and understand your own thinking and make it better. The beauty of the thinking pill, aside from the fact that it's free, like the movement pill, is it doesn't just mask symptoms. It builds the kind of fitness, mental fitness, that drives all other forms of fitness and that enables us to thrive. It's clear that this pill gets us in a state of readiness. The only question is, are we ready to start taking these pills? The pill, thinking, is not a quick fix. They're daily practices. And the beauty of metacognition is that it doesn't just build better thinking, it builds the foundation for everything else. That's what the research tells us. If metacognition, like movement, was a pill, everybody would be taking it. But again, people they want the view, but they don't want the climb. Over 30 years ago, I started asking dumb questions, and I was shocked that the scientists didn't have good answers for them. I frankly thought that they had already figured it out. And my colleague and partner, Laura Cabrera, and I have been asking dumb questions ever since. Questions like these. What is thinking? Are there universal patterns to thinking? How do we measure it? Can we get better at it? Or is it something we're just born with or without? How do we get better at it? Are there specific things we can do to get better at it? Can those things be taught? If you practice those things, does it have an effect? What effect does it have? How much effect does it have? Those are questions we've asked over that kind of is the histogram of our research questions. And I'm happy to say that we now have some pretty solid answers to these questions, which we once didn't. We now know, for example, what it is. It's made up of these four patterns I told you about: distinctions, systems, relationships, and perspectives, or DSRP. And let's talk about what thinking actually is. At its core, thinking can be boiled down to a simple formula, M equals IO. This simply means that mental models, or the M, are the result of how we organize, the O, information, the I. Every thought we have, whether conscious or subconscious, is a mental model. And those mental models drive everything: our actions, our decisions, our behaviors, feelings, and even the outcomes that we create. This simple formula teaches us something profound about human learning, human behavior, and even problems and problem solving. Learning is captured by another formula, L equals the change in M, which explains that learning is just a change in mental models. When you learn something new, your mental model shifts to include that new understanding. And behavior is captured by another simple formula. A change in behavior is a function of a change in mental models. That just simply means what it sounds like. Changing behavior is a direct function of changing your mental model. If you want to act differently, you first need to think differently. And every problem you face is preceded by a mental model that shaped how you perceive it. Change the way you think and you change the nature of the problem itself. So if we think of problem X, we know that it is preceded by a mental model X. But how do we organize this information into these mental models? This is where DSRP comes in, the 4 universal patterns of organizing information. Distinctions are really asking what is something and what is it not. Systems, what are its parts and what whole is it a part of? Relationships, how are things connected or linked? And perspectives, what does it look like? What does something look like from another point of view? These patterns are fundamental to human thought. They're like the push-ups, squats, and lunges of cognition. Functional movements you use every day, whether you realize it or not. And just like physical fitness, mental fitness improves with practice. And this is something we've really focused on. The more you use these patterns, the better you get at thinking. And the best part is you don't need to learn 38 different types of thinking. Every single one of them, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, creative thinking, can be traced back to these core cognitive functions. Over decades of research, we've seen these patterns transform learning, decision-making, and problem-solving in ways that are measurable and repeatable. And recently, we reoriented the trajectory of our research from the science of thinking to the science of the practice of thinking. In other words, we've moved away from the simple question, what is thinking? Because we feel like we've come to a pretty good set of findings on that, which took decades to answer, to a more refined question based on our findings, that is, how do we improve our thinking? What specific things do we do to practice? And what is the effect of this practice? We've seen some surprising findings and remarkable effects. Namely, one thing is what I would call a game changer. We've discovered a Pareto law that shows us that the most important questions to ask and the most important mental moves to practice, these moves, practicing them, leads to between 270 and 580% increases in performance in problem solving, complex cognition, and emotional intelligence. These moves are fun and easy and can be learned in a few minutes. Much like push-ups, sit-ups, squats, and pull-ups, they form the foundation of all cognitive and mental movement. So you gotta read the subtext here. I can teach you how to do a push-up in a minute, but you're not gonna get any benefit from just learning how to do a push-up. You're gonna get the benefit from doing push-ups, right? Imagine a time before treadmills, before gyms, or even the concept of exercise. Life was movement, walking to gather water, lifting to build a fire, bending to plant seeds. Movement was simply living. Now imagine the moment this changed. The very first person who said, I didn't really move enough today. Maybe I'll go for a walk. Or the first person who thought, I've been counting grain all day. What if I lift a bag of this grain and squat with it? The first person who pushed up off the ground and asked, what if I did this again and again? From these small, curious movements and moments, the concept of exercise was born. This is the opportunity. This is a conversation I hear often. People love DSRP, but they think of it as a tool and they can pick up and put it down at will. I had a teacher tell me once, I love DSRP. I use it on Tuesdays in math, but not on Thursdays in English. And I asked her to repeat the sentence, but replace DSRP with thinking. And she laughed because it suddenly sounded absurd. I love thinking. I use thinking on Tuesdays in math, but not on Thursdays in English. The truth is, DSRP isn't optional. It's the way we process every thought, every piece of information, every moment. The real question isn't if you will use it, it's whether you'll use it with intention and awareness. Because once you do, everything changes and becomes more clear. DSRP is something your brain is already and always doing. You don't get to decide whether you use it any more than you get to decide whether you're going to be affected by gravity. It's always there, shaping the way you and your organizations operate. The key isn't deciding when and where you'll use DSRP. The key is just recognizing that it's always happening and learning to make it intentional. That's where the magic happens. When you realize that, it's like taking blinders off, and suddenly worlds that were previously unseen open up to you. So where thinking is concerned, what do we know? We know that it can be measured. It can be taught and learned. We know precisely what to do to get better at it. In the past decade, we've been working on research and tools to help us build these skills for hopefully someday 8 billion people. Because there's something else that we know, that things change when thinking changes. That is, things only change when we think differently. In fact, I was guiding in Italy not too long ago, and I had one of my favorite interactions with a client. She said, with all sincerity, Derek, why do I have to change my thinking? It's a marvelous question. I loved it. And my answer was, you don't. You absolutely don't. If there is absolutely nothing you want to change in your life, then don't change your thinking. Because a change in thinking leads to change. Of course, we all have heard Einstein's words that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. He also said, thinking should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. This is akin to loving reality and also similar to the story of the three bears. We want to get our thinking in alignment with reality. Not too simple, not too complex, just right. Finally, Einstein said, science is no more than a refinement of everyday thinking. He was so right on this. The surgical, scalpel-like ways in which we scientists attack a problem are really no different than the hackneyed machete-like ways that life requires us to cut through the jungle of everyday life. The father of Western scientific thought said, I think, therefore I am. The father of Eastern thought said, with our thoughts we create the world. Today, I'm standing in my gym, speaking to you from my gym, which is also a portion of our lab. Mental fitness drives all other types of fitness, physical, emotional, and motivational. In my gym, I have equipment and exercises designed for moving and knowing the body. But I also have tools and movements for exercising the mind. I'm not referring to the spat of popular games and apps that overpromise and underdeliver on the effect on brain games. The evidence suggests that those only make you better at doing those things and do not transfer to higher order skills. I'm talking about real cognitive movements which can be learned and practiced and are universally applicable, like a push-up. These movements are functional movements. What do I mean by that? I mean that they're movements that have everyday analogs. If you do a squat, it equates to picking up a child, getting out of a chair, or lifting a grocery bag from the floor. If you do a push-up or a sit-up, you'll need those movements to roll from your back to get up off the and then back down onto the floor. These are simple but profound movements that are required throughout life, and that the more you do of them, the more vital you'll be. The same is true of the mind. I can't say that enough. The same is true of the mind. Our research shows there are 4 basic movements that if you do these 4 things, you'll get 80% of the benefit with 20% of the effort. What's called the Pareto law of cognition. We've taught these movements in less than 1 minute increments and seen remarkable benefits, such as what I said earlier, 580% increases in problem solving, social emotional ability, and communication skills. But to incorporate these movements into your everyday life, that is to remember to use them when life is whirling around you, requires repetition, practice. Not much, but some. We have seen people make vast improvements in their abilities in hours, days, and weeks. The tools are here. The opportunity is now. Thinking isn't just a skill, it's the foundation of what we do. And just like physical fitness, mental fitness is a practice. So I'll leave you with this. Are you ready to climb? Because when you align your thinking with reality, when you love reality, not only will you survive, you will thrive. And you're going to love the view. Thank you. And we can, I can answer any questions you have. I covered a lot of ground there, but I think we have some time. I'm not sure what time it wraps up.
Yeah, we definitely have some time. So maybe one question that I always ponder and don't have fully, it's always different answer, but is it the mindset or the structure or this broader system? So like if we look at it in context of organizations, and the theme of this conference is organizational design and team dynamics. A lot of times I've seen organizational structures change, and that forces people to rethink or change their mindset. If you think about, our environment, when our environment changes, changes thinking. So my question is, I know it's probably relationship that goes back and forth. It's not one or the other, but it's the relationship. And that's, I think, where distinction in the relationship that you have in DSRP. But could you maybe talk about, in context maybe of organizations, of that balance between changing the mindset, or sometimes you have to change the system, broader system, in order to see the shift in mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's kind of a micro influences macro, so what we might call bottom up versus top down. There is a thing in systems thinking, a saying which we say a lot, which is structure determines behavior. So we can change the structure of things. Like you can imagine if I just simply change the width of a hallway, literally structurally, or the organizational structure, that's going to change the behavior of people and how they use that hallway, right? Because they're going to get funneled into a narrower gap or something like that. And similarly, in an organization, if you change the slightly more conceptual structures, not the hallways kind of easier to understand, but that structure can change behavior. Now, the behavior is going to change, but we don't always know why the behavior is changing. It could be that you're doing a maladaptive thinking change to just manipulate that new structure and keep things the same. So just because the behavior changes doesn't mean you're getting really authentic changes in the system. You might just be getting people manipulating the system and not really moving the system to the direction that you want it to go. So what you fundamentally want to do is understand the mental model that people have today and the mental model that you want them to have tomorrow. Understand the difference between those, and that's what DSRP allows you to do. It gives you the language for understanding those, and try to move the culture towards that change in mental model. At the same time, if there's structural things in the environment that are stopping the culture from moving that way, sometimes we call that lock-in in complexity science, then we also have to change that. So a great example of that is like electric cars. If people want to shift their thinking and go to electric cars, one of the structural problems they're going to have, or they had in the beginning, was the system wasn't really set up for charging stations every so often, like gasoline stations. And so we had to change that at both directions. We had to change the mental model, but we also had to increase or decrease the amount of space between charging stations. So typically, big organizational change is going to need both to kind of collapse in on the structure.
That makes sense. And that made me think of, first distinction that you made, behaviors are not same as mindset. And you could camouflage a mindset or mental model, because I can say, I'll go with agile. And like I've hear people say, like, I'll go with this, but they don't believe it. They don't have that mental model. They haven't changed. They just changed their behavior so they don't get fired. but deep down they haven't really changed the way that they think.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. All right. We have 5 more minutes. So I have other questions, but I also want to maybe see if anybody else has a question. So I know there were a couple in here. I'll just go with the last one that I see here. How might this be brought to systemic team coaching? Jeannie asked.
By which you mean like if you're in a room with a team and coaching them as a team?
I believe so. I think that's what she means.
Yeah, so we use this quite a lot. We actually have a lot of tools that we've developed for this. We have one called Think Blocks, another called Think Cards, DSRP blocks and cards. And one of the things that we know is that people have the same words for different mental models, and they have different words for the same mental models, right? So they're using the same term, but they're meaning different things. And this is just even in a small team, like 5, an executive team. I can't tell you. One time I was in a very high level executive meeting in the Silicon Valley, and these folks went at each other for about an hour. And I was going to I kind of wanted to let it stew and let it happen because I wanted them to feel the pain a little bit. And they went at each other for about an hour. And then we stopped the conversation, went over to the tables, and we had them map out using DSRP blocks, map out their ideas. And the thing that these two main guys were arguing about, which was bringing everybody in on different sides. So now multiply that whole amount of executives and what they're making times the number of hours that they argued. It's pretty costly. We go over to the table and they realize, oh, I'm using the same word as you for the same system, but the system I'm talking about is in this department, and the system you're talking about is in a different department. They weren't even talking about the same thing. And they were having this vehement, like, just conflict. So a lot of times we have to make sure that in those teamed environments, are we even talking about the same thing? When we say the same words, that doesn't mean we're thinking the same thing, because M equals IO. The words are the I, but you don't know how the words are being organized to make meaning. And so you don't really know whether we set a goal and we all walk away, and that goal could be different for me and you, unless it's a very, very obvious goal, right? So that's one way it's used, and we do that quite a bit.
Yeah. There are a few more questions. They're really good questions. I just think they might be a little too deep. Zach had a great question around Black Swan events and just in general. So Black Swan events, for those of you that are not familiar, is just like events are highly unlikely to happen, but when they happen, they could have huge impacts, right? That's my understanding. So the second part of Zach's question is, what happens when we overthink, or is it possible to overthink? But yet, when these events, when they happen, we have to explain them to others. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's funny. We did a podcast episode on overthinking, and it got a lot of play, and some people are very angry about it. So feel free to go watch that one if you want more on this. But the overthinking is a really interesting concept, and people are really highly invested in its existence. I don't actually think it's a thing. I think what we're talking about when we're talking about overthinking is actually anxiety and worry. We're not actually thinking. We're OCD revolving around worry and anxiety, and so we're sort of just running over and over again in our mind, and we call it overthinking, but it really has nothing to do with actual thinking. It's mostly anxiety producing worry. And so just the ability to sort of make those distinctions differently makes you realize that this is an anxiety problem. This is an emotional issue, not a cognitive one. Now, I'm sure people will disagree because a lot of people are really excuse me, really invested in overthinking. But I don't, there's no evidence for the existence of overthinking. Like, I don't think it's a thing.
Yeah. We're at time, so we have 5 minutes. So there were a couple of few great questions. I would highly recommend, to follow Derek's podcast, to get his book. Or how many books? Is it just one? Or I know you've
we've had 12 books, but the main one for systems is Systems Thinking Made Simple, and the main one for organizational design is called Flock Not Cloth.
Yes. Yep. So I'll put those in the chat, and also include them when I upload it to YouTube in the description. But Derek, thank you so much. This was inspirational. Also, not having slides is a good change too, because it forces us not to look at the slides and listen to what you're saying. So I appreciate it. Well, so thank you. I would recommend, connect with Derek. I'll send follow-up email with recordings and everything. But I really appreciate you, Derek, for taking the time out of your busy schedule, and I'm happy that you finally were able to present. So
yeah, sorry about last year, but thank you very much, everyone, and feel free to send us a note on our website or something like that. We can answer any of the questions I didn't get to. Thank you.